Welcome to the Rant Live. Well, hello there, Evan. How are you?
I'm great, I guess. I mean,
well, the Cubs are great,
sort of. Like, tell me.
I mean, they are legitimately great. I mean, there are. We'll get into the numbers here in a little bit over this 6-game winning streak, but suffice it to say, they are playing great.
But tell me another team in any sport at any level that can somehow make a 6-game winning streak feel bad.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Like,
I assume you're referring to the game yesterday.
Well, yeah, but in general, but it's also like, okay, they had lost 9 in a row. It was like, okay, they're just going to keep on sucking so bad. They're going for a top 3 spot, maybe, top 4 at the outside. And now it's like, holy crap. They just swept the Phillies and the Pirates. They overtook the Pirates in the standings. They're moving up and playing good baseball finally, which, but then the last of those games, they have the day off today, obviously, but the last of those games could possibly be the last home game for Willson Contreras and Ian Happ. And so you feel all melancholy about that. But then it's like winning. I want to put this the right way. I'm never. It's not like there's no value. There's no value to wins or losses really, because the record at the end of the day doesn't matter, other than the fact that they still want a better shot at that top pick. And so it's like, now you're winning. Now, like if this had happened early, things might be different. I don't know. Yeah,
listen,
probably not.
You know what this reminds me of is. I remember when I was dating a girl and she was getting ready to go off to college, and it was like you could see the end, right? The end was there. There was no doubt about it. But then, like right before you leave, she leaves to go away to college, things have never been better. But it's still going to end because I'm staying back in Omaha, Nebraska. She's moving on to bigger and better things. The writing is on the wall. It's over. And those last few moments are still like better than you want them to be, right? Like you wish
you almost want it was bad. Like you want it to almost be bad. So then it'd be like, man, this would make it so much easier, because it's just like, oh,
it can't be
that's kind of. I mean, it's not the same. That's not quite how it was last year, but like, none of those guys were really playing all that well at the time. And it's sort of like, okay, they had turned down offers depending on who you believe and what you want to listen to. But you knew that was going to happen. And the team wasn't playing well, right? They had been just, not that they are this year, but at least it wasn't like some big winning streak or something, right? And
their record last year was 51-55 at the trade deadline, which is far better. Only 4 games below 500. Yeah. So there was a chance. And the Braves, as we've talked about, were right there with about the same record, and they went on to win the World Series. So there was a chance that they could have, kind of cleaned things up there and possibly made the postseason, especially in the NL Central, which has just historically been weak since the Cubs' dominance has ended. But, it's now they're 40-57, but they're playing better. I mean, last year after the All-Star break, they were 6-9 heading into the trade, which was July 31st, heading into July 31st, post All-Star break. This year they are 6-0, and they're going to play the Giants in the final 4 games before the trade deadline. And the Giants are not playing well. And the Giants, very much like their last 2 opponents, the Phillies and the Pirates, are not a great offensive team. And I think they've lost a bunch in a row. I don't know if it's like 6 in a row or something like that. Let's see.
Yeah, they're not playing all that well.
They've lost 6 in a row. So it's possible. I mean, the Cubs are going to have a winning record post All-Star break heading into the trade deadline. That's a guarantee. It's just how much of a winning record are they going to have? I mean, it is conceivable that the Cubs can win the next 4 games and go into the trade deadline on a 10-game winning streak and trade away their 2 most valuable veterans with Willson Contreras and Ian Happ, who, I mean, listen, everybody's playing well right now. It's like everyone's playing really well, and Ian Happ and Willson Contreras are certainly not leading the charge there. but they're two guys that are important parts of the lineup that when you remove them at the trade deadline, it changes how other opposing pitchers have to pitch to the other players in the Cubs lineup. They no longer have to take into consideration two guys like Ian Happ and Wilson Contreras, and that's big. And so don't expect this winning to continue, but who knows?
I mean, well, and look at how well they're pitching. I mean, that's the biggest thing. I mean, there's a few things, right? There's the two things we can look at is like their pitching has been incredibly inconsistent, and then their inability to do anything with runners in scoring position. And these are things we've talked about. But I mean, if you obviously the way they're playing now and the way they played in the 9 games prior, like neither of those is really accurately indicative of what this team is. However, at least, not to be that hot or that cold at any one point, but I mean, if you look back and you go, man, what if, like, look at all the dudes who've been, so Kyle Hendricks currently on the IL, Wade Miley on the IL, Drew Smyly has spent a ton of time on the IL, Marcus Stroman back, but has been on the IL more than once, right? And Miley has more than once. And so if you, that's 80% of your projected opening season starting rotation that has missed significant time. And whether you want to call it, whether it's because of that or for other reasons, hasn't, they have not pitched consistently well. So, I mean, they've gotten great contributions. And then Adbert Alzolay, who was possibly one of the, I mean, you could make the argument that 100% of their projected starting rotation has never been together at any point this season, depending on, they've never had that, or that 100% of them have missed significant time, if you want to go that route. But obviously Justin Steele, Keegan Thompson have done really well, and they've been a big part of this run lately. They've been getting contributions from Adrian Sampson. But if you go back to the start of the season, say, man, if these guys were healthy, if the pitchers were, and that's a big if, you can never, right, I'm not indicating that the Cubs would be very good or anything like that, but in the weak division where they play, right, where you're going to steal some games, and they've won a series against the Cardinals, right? They've won a series against the Brewers. They've obviously they won a series against the Pirates. They've beaten the Reds. It's conceivable that if things break differently, this is a team that's actually in contention in the division. And I'm not even saying that means they would not be taking the same direction they are, and that they would.
And that's kind of where I go.
Yeah,
is I don't think that changes where we are and kind of what we're talking about right now. I just don't, because it's not like if they had a history, if they've extended anybody, I mean, who have they extended?
David Bodie and Kyle Hendricks. Full stop.
Yeah, the cheapest extensions you could do.
Hendricks aside, like the Bodie one, man. What's going on there? Like that was, I still think that was just a weird deal. And David Bodie's a good dude, but it is incredible to me how many people still overrate the hell out of him. Like somebody the other day on one of the lineup posts was like, I'd rather see Bodie in there any day over that mediocre Patrick Wisdom. I'm like, you may want to go back and check the stats on those two, bro, because listen, Wisdom isn't having a great season, but Bodie hadn't hit for any sort of power in the last 2 years. And I mean, people, like, if there is anyone who is defined more by like 2 hits, it's like, oh, the grand slam, and the other, he's got a couple of walk-off homers. And man, has he ridden that in the eyes of a lot of fans, because we're talking about a dude who people wanted to trade Chris Bryant and put David Bodie in as a starting everyday second or third baseman. And they still want him over Wisdom. Like, I don't get it. But anyway, but I mean, but there again, that's another dude who was hurt. There are a lot of people who they expected to contribute in ways that they simply have not. And that, going back to the original point, is that if they were in any sort of contention, if they were in a position, even just what, as you mentioned, what they were last year, where they're kind of they're floating around that 500 mark. The division last year was pretty weak, right? I mean, the Cardinals were right there around 500 around the deadline or the All-Star break. I mean, you're looking at, because I think as you'd mentioned, they were like 4 or 5 games under, because they were only like 2 games under 500 when they traded Peterson at the deadline, if I recall. Like them and the Braves and the Cardinals had almost identical records, like half a game separating them. And that makes it
they
tough.
traded
Like
Peterson like a week or two
at the
before
deadline.
the deadline, right?
Or
Was
I'm sorry,
at the
it was during it, no, it was I'm sorry, it was at the All-Star break. It was at
There you
All-Star
go.
break.
Yeah.
Right after the All-Star game, not the deadline, but another
Yeah, and
line of
that was like the
demarcation.
writing was on the wall with that trade,
Right.
right? Not that
You knew it
Peterson
was
was that
there.
huge, but once you start
Yeah.
trading guys like
But
that.
you knew they could have bought, like the Cardinals picked up players, the Braves picked up players in that record, and the Cubs clearly were ready to jettison everyone, and then immediately went into a tailspin. But that's what makes it tough, and that's also very telling, because you're going. It doesn't matter whether, in theory, you could buy players and contend. They do not mean to. Like, they are not intending to do that. They don't want to. And that's obviously what we're seeing this year.
Has a much different feel than last season. Last season, you didn't know who was going to come up to replace Chris Bryant, Javi Baez, Anthony Rizzo. I mean, we didn't even know who Frank Schwindel was, for God's sakes. And so now it's different, right? It's like we pretty much know. I mean, there may be a couple guys that come up, but we know who is probably going to come up. I mean, we know who's on the team because most of the team is made up of these younger prospects at this point, surrounded by, a couple veterans. I would say the godsend of the past several weeks has been that Jason Hayward hasn't been in the lineup. I mean, that's been the best part about what's going on this season, is that we don't have to sit there and watch Jason Hayward pound the ball into the dirt to second base and get out. It's just that, to me, that's been the best part, to be honest with you. It's like, I know it's hard losing Ian Happ and Wilson Contreras, but at least we get to see guys in there now who, Nelson Velasquez. I'm just going to go over some of the numbers real quickly. During this streak since June 17th, the Cubs are on a 6-game winning streak. Nelson Velasquez has 3 home runs. He's slashing 400, 500, and 1,300.
That's solid.
3 home runs. He's got a 366 WRC plus, and he's striking out only 16.7% of the time. In fact, everyone on the team is performing like that. Morel is a 198 WRC plus with 8.3% strikeout rate. Seiya Suzuki, 146 WRC plus with a 14.8% strikeout rate. Ian Happ is one of the highest strikeout rates on the team right now at 25.9%. Now he's still got a 128 WRC plus, and Contreras is at a 209 WRC plus, striking out 18.2% of the time, which is closer to league average. But I mean, I would say just there's a lot of excitement to be had going forward. And I think the return for whatever the Cubs end up getting for Ian Happ and Wilson Contreras is, I'm going to be really surprised if they're like 18 or 19-year-old prospects. Maybe there'll be 1 or 2 in there. But what I'm expecting, and you tell me what your opinion is on this, is I'm expecting guys who are going to be closer to Major League, MLB, kind of big league ready. Maybe next year would be when you would expect to see them. But I don't know. What do you think on that?
I've gone back and forth on it because actually, before I get to that, let me ask you this: do you think we see Jason Hayward again in a Cubs uniform?
God, I hope.
Do
not,
you think?
But yeah,
do you think? Do you think they're playing this thing out, and it's just an understood agreement that he's just going to kind of continue to quote unquote work on baseball activities basically throughout the rest of the season, and then they quietly DFA him this winter and let him see if he can catch on with a new team at the minimum?
If they have any intention of winning next season, the answer to that would be absolutely 100%, because these young guys need to get in there and play, and they're proving why. Christopher Morel, Nelson Velasquez, Seiya Suzuki, these guys are killing it, and they need to continue to get at bats. There's no point in bringing Jason Hayward back, and where's he going to play?
Well, yeah, it would not make a whole lot of sense, but no. So I guess getting back to the other question though, I mean, a lot of it depends on the teams, right? I mean, we've seen a bunch of different teams mentioned for the two of these. That the thing that would be a little bit, I mean, it's a little bit weird because it'll depend again on that team and then who those top prospects are that they've got, and whether or not. So, like with the Cubs, when they traded Gleyber Torres, as part of the Aroldis Chapman deal. Part of that was because the Cubs already had two guys in Javier Baez and Addison Russell who were locked in at shortstop / second base. And they're just, okay, this guy could be your top prospect, but guess what? We've already got two young guys at the position he plays. And then they knew, and then they had Chris Bryant, so he's not sliding over to third, right? So basically, okay, now he's expendable, and he was a little bit farther away, right? He was only at A-ball at the time, and so it's a little bit different. But I do think you see some of these teams where they may have some players who are close to major league ready, but are being blocked, and so for that team in particular, that player would have a little bit less value, and we're seeing that in some of these talks. But I think it's a circumstantial thing, because I know a lot of teams would rather part with guys who are farther away. If you are a competitive team right now, especially if we're talking about a pitcher or something like that, right, who might be able to come up and help you out in a David Price sort of way with the Rays back when he first debuted, right, worked out of the bullpen when they made that World Series run under Madden in 14, and it's. So some of those, I'd be surprised to see them part with that. But if we are talking outfielder, shortstop, second baseman, that kind of a guy who maybe they could figure out where to move him around. But there again, the Cubs have a bunch of guys. The reason they drafted 16 pitchers was because they were so stacked with position players, most of whom are shortstops and outfielders, that to get a guy in there who could ostensibly block one of them, unless then you flip some of those guys. So yeah, I don't know. I keep going all over the map with it, but I do think it'll depend on the trade partner. If it's somebody like the Braves, who we saw mentioned with Happ, I think there are some guys who are closer to the major leagues or who have already made the majors, for at least a debut. If we're looking at the Mets, I think they are not going to move one of their top two guys. So I think maybe we look at somebody who's perhaps, or some bodies who are perhaps a little bit farther away.
And so that's what's interesting to me with the Mets, to be honest with you, is that, they're sitting there saying that they're not going to trade their top two guys. And it feels like they're just backing themselves into a corner, because, if that's what the word is, and whether that's true or not, and you're a team that wants to acquire Wilson Contreras, and I'm assuming there's going to be several suitors out there, doesn't that kind of weaken the Mets' position?
Not necessarily. And I don't even know if they're the number one for him, but I think depending on who the Cubs now, could they come with another package that would get that in there? But I think after you look at a team like that, especially when the Cubs are involved, that to an extent you could say they got burned. They had Javi for a couple months, but he started really slowly with them before kind of catching on, and then he didn't re-sign.
But it's like, right? We don't owe them.
Trevor
for
Williams,
that,
what's he going to do? Right. Well, no, but I'm saying the Mets might look at it like, wait a minute, oh crap, and then the Cubs clearly like something about like the one of the first things the Cubs did as soon as Pete Crow Armstrong could start swinging again was get him in with their hitting instructors and tweak a couple things in there, and we're seeing the results of that. So I think the Mets may look at that almost in a way that like, oh crap, maybe they're evaluating something. And what's interesting to me about the Mets, so when you look at that, right, is that they don't want to move their top guys. And now for the life of me, because now I was looking at this thing about Ian Happ and like who might be on the map there. But it was Alvarez is like the top Mets prospect who's a catcher, right? But what's in, and they don't want to move him. But what's interesting to me is that the Mets also drafted Kevin Parada, who we've talked about on the show, slugging catcher out of Georgia Tech, who they drafted, I think, number 11 overall. I believe they got.
I'm not in love with his swing though. His swing is too funky for me. I know that he's one of the, the highest rated catcher in the draft and blah blah blah. Have you seen his swing?
I haven't really looked at him. No.
Check out video of how he swings, and it's I just don't see it playing. It's super funky. It's kind of like he brings the bat. It's just the bat action. He gets it through the zone, obviously.
Oh yeah, I don't know why I was thinking Alvarez. It's wait, no, is that it? Yeah, Francisco Alvarez. Okay, never mind. Yeah, I'm looking at I have like 3 different articles open so I can reference them. But yes, I'm sorry. But here's the thing though, right? What did I just say about Pete Crow Armstrong? is that there was something a little, his swing wasn't quite built the right way. That's something they can clean up a little bit. And now the thing with that is that you cannot trade a recent draft pick until the season is over. So a deal like that would have to be a player to be named later. Now, it's also a little bit different because you have the DH, right? So a guy can be just a hitter, but it is interesting, right? So we know the Mets need catching help. We know their number one overall prospect is a catcher, and we know their top draft pick from this recent draft is also a catcher and a college guy too, who could move somewhat quickly. And so you do kind of wonder, if they're not willing to move their top guy, is there a way they'd be able to move Parada, which I don't want to call that. I called it a coup. Obviously, you're talking about giving up Contreras and probably David Robertson or Michael Givens or somebody like that in order to make something like that work. But if you're able to come away with a dude who everybody thought you would have tried to go after at number 7 or who felt might be a top 5 pick, in addition to some of these other players, and with the Cubs, again, from their catching perspective, not having a ton of that you can really depend on, although Miguel Amaya is raking, I'd be very interested to see something like that, right? So when we talk about guys who are kind of closer, there are a couple. I'm trying to remember who else. Brett Beatty, I think, was the other one, right? Mark Vientos. Beatty's the one they don't want to move. Ronnie Mauricio, he's been – but the thing is, like last year, Mauricio was one of them who was off limits when they were talking about Cubs trades, right, with the Mets. And so now he's fallen all the way down to 3. Mark Vientos, number 5. So I don't know. There are, we've heard of those names related to the Cubs before. And so I wonder, though, but if I'm the Mets, I'm going, okay, wait, if the Cubs want these guys, what are they seeing something we're not? What do we need to do? But yeah, I think the Cubs just want to get a bunch of good players. But I would love to see them get somebody who can step in, as we've talked about. The only way, if you trade these guys away, the only way it's actually helpful for future seasons, not the only way, I'm sorry, for next season, right, is if you're actually getting somebody who you believe could, at least to an extent, make up for the production that you just traded away. Because otherwise, again, as we keep going around, and I know there's been a lot out there, and I promise I'll shut up with this in a little bit here, but there's been a lot of talk. Everybody's like, hey, if you can trade for Juan Soto, you do it. Like, you just go get that player. Everybody always wins those trades for these superstars. And I'm like, all right, I mean, yes, if you look at, especially like I go back to that Tigers trade for Miggy, but if you look at that, yeah, it's because they traded away guys who ended up being nothing to get him. But at the same time, you have to have that core kind of around him. If you go and add Juan Soto to the Cubs right now, they're still a bad team. They still need to do so much more around that. And that's the problem I have. And that's the thing. I want to make it very, very clear, because all these people are like, yes, you go trade. Like, okay, cool. But do we trust the Cubs to commit the money that he needs and also the money that it needs to put a team around him? I don't know about that. But as I get back to it, right, the Cubs need to be able to replace the production from Wilson Contreras and Ian Happ, which is a significant amount of production. And they've got to do it at a value-based price, because Happ is only making $6.5 million. Contreras is only making like 10. Like, together, they are only making $17 million. It would cost way more than that. Right. It would cost so much more than that to replace both of them combined. With one free agent is going to cost more than $17 million. So that's where, if you're going to make a trade for a dude, you better find somebody who can step in pretty quick, or hope that your system produces them, because that alone, it's a tough spot, man. It's a tough spot.
Yeah, it's interesting, that's for sure. What do you think do you think Wilson Contreras is gone 100%, no doubt about it?
Yes. Absolutely.
So it'd be shocking to see him not
I would
sign.
be entirely shocked.
Here's my thing, though, is that, listen, so yes, I agree. I think they should trade Wilson Contreras, because this season is dust. There's no way they're going to win, and they'll be able to get such value for him coming back that it makes no sense to keep him. But he is a free agent at the end of the year, and he is obviously emotionally tied to the Cubs. Now, he's going to want to get paid, but could he take a hometown discount? Maybe. And the thing is that I just think that if you're looking forward for the Cubs and you want to win next season, listen, if you look at the Cubs pitching staff with just the guys they've got right now, you've got Steele, Thompson, Stroman, Killian, and Hendricks. That is not a bad line pitching staff. In fact, I think that's top 15 for sure, top 10. Possibly.
If they perform up to where they should, or where
even better than top 10,
expect
maybe?
them to.
And if you've got a bullpen there, depending on who the Cubs trade, but they've shown an ability, an uncanny ability actually, to be able to cobble together a bullpen each and every year. And so I don't think there's a big concern about whether the Cubs are going to have a good bullpen to support their starters next season. And so when you start looking just at pitching, and then you start to talk about Nelson Velasquez and Chris Morel and Seiya Suzuki, and I mean, even if you wanted to throw Alfonso Rivas in there, who's not playing well, but I do believe that if he gets more playing time, he is going to start clicking. He's a great player. He always has been. And other players on the Cubs, PJ Higgins, he's a great, maybe great is too much, but he's a great replacement.
I think definitely too much, but he's a good, he's not
solid. A great player, but he's a great replacement, and he's definitely an above average catcher. And I just think that when you start to look at what the Cubs could look like next season, it's not that discouraging. It's not at all. And if the Cubs can get back some players from trading Ian Happ, which I don't think there's a guarantee they're going to trade Ian Happ, because he still has a year left on his contract. He's not a free agent.
I think it's as close to a guarantee as Happ is, almost, or I mean, as Contreras is almost. They are aggressively shopping him. They are aggressively shopping him. They want to move.
But that's a guy who they could hold on to. I mean, the same thing happened to Wilson Contreras last year. I mean, they shipped everybody out except Wilson Contreras because they knew he had an extra year on his contract. And
but they weren't shopping him. They weren't trying to move him. They've been trying to move Happ for weeks. I mean, not that they wanted to move him earlier, but I'm saying
we'll see. I think the asking price is going to be very high.
Yeah.
Let's put it that way. I don't think they're going to come down.
No, and they're going to bundle him.
They can hold on.
Yeah, I think they're going to bundle him with a reliever, but I think he gets moved because I think they see his value as being as high as it's ever going to get. And for the same reason they drafted all those pitchers, they know how many people they've got coming up through the system. They know how many outfield prospects they've got coming. And I question this. I want to go back to something real quick, and there's a comment in there. Like, Keegan Thompson's not being traded. There's no, we gotta comment. I hope he didn't. Like, they're not moving any of those guys. Sense.
Our bullpen has not been bad this year. In fact, our bullpen is ranked 12th in all of Major League Baseball. So I think, you get commenters out there that don't know what they're talking about. And I guess
right, but you do not trade when you are a team that needs pitchers, when you are a team that needs young players, when you are a team that doesn't have more pitchers really coming up. You do not trade a guy making the minor league or the major league minimum.
Yeah, Thompson's not getting traded. There's no way. No way.
Unless the only way it happens is if they trade for Juan Soto, right? Which we just discussed. Like that would be the only case. It would have to be a blockbuster to where you're having to do that to acquire him. But back to, again, when you look at all these position players and when you look at Happ, like you talked about it, right? The reason they didn't get more, and they did a really good job in all the trades they made, but the reason they didn't get even more was because none of those guys had any time remaining on their contracts. Happ would be the first person they've really traded in the last couple of years who actually had value beyond this year and who still has that control. So I think you look at a team like the Braves who lost Adam Duvall, right? Who they need a left fielder now. And so Happ might be that guy that they could kind of spring for, but I think he's also got value in that he could play a couple of those different outfield positions. He could play second base if you had to. I don't think that would be the smart money for a team to do. But the fact that, again, he hits well from both sides, that he's been just absolutely mashing from the right side this season. The only thing that you worry about a little bit is that the power is not there so much. But again, I think they'll be able to move him. A lot of that depends on kind of what happens. I feel like with Soto, one way or the other, and then kind of where that market goes from there. But I'm really interested to see it because the bullpen is solid. Again, I don't know, why anybody would question that necessarily. But speaking of which, friend of the program, Scotty Efros, picked up his first save the other day, and in his major league leading 46th appearance,
he may be the closer going forward.
Well, hey, I think it's probably going to be like between him and Wick. I think it'll be kind of a commit. Hughes is another one who's going to get some of that. But, I mean, one way or the other, I would like to see the Cubs. If nothing else, I'd like to see them get some guys who are close to the MLB level so we can kind of see some young guys come in. I'd rather that than go out and do like, Jerry Hairston Jr. and Steven Souza Jr. and any other juniors that are coming in on short-term deals that are not possibly part of the future in the least. But I don't know. I want to see Mash Mervis up. I want to see Alexander Canario, who I think Canario comes up this season. He's already on the 40-man roster. He is absolutely destroying Double-A pitching here in July. And I mean, again, if he's already on the 40-man, like what the hell? The team is going to suck. Why not? Get him up here and mash some homers and let's have some fun with this. So at least give me that. If you're not going to give me a competitive team, give me all the prospects and let me see some of this stuff work and figure out what the hell you're going to do. But
I think that's what we're going to get, and I think we're going to have a team that's not going to be bad this second half of the season. They're not going to be anywhere near as bad as they were the last year in the second half. At least
they'll be dynamic.
I'd be very surprised if they were anywhere near as bad as they were last season, and that's basically because the guys that we've talked about, a lot of the prospects are already up. These are guys that we've already seen, and the guys that are going to be coming up, like Mervis and whoever else ends up coming up, they're just supplementing the guys who we've already seen who are up, who are having success at the big league level. So I think there's a lot to be excited about, and it's so hard to kind of buy into that because it just feels like we've been duped over and over again. But I do think that where we are right now, and obviously it's very dependent upon what the Cubs get back for Wilson Contreras, Ian Happ, and whoever else they end up trading. But I think that things do not look as bad as I was thinking they were going to look. Now, of course, it's easy to say that because here we are, a 6-game winning streak. Everyone feels good. I mean, it's not hard to feel real good about the way things are going when you've won 6 games, which is the longest winning streak of the season. So, I mean, maybe there's a little bit of pull going on there, and maybe I'm a little disillusioned, but I'm not feeling too bad.
Well, and again, bear in mind regardless of the bullpen performance, you're talking about trading the closer who has been completely lights out, and Givens, who's been really good this season as well. Although Givens is a guy, I don't know if I'm alone here. I feel like I keep waiting for the other shoe to drop on him. Like I keep waiting for something bad to happen. And so I don't know, but Robertson has just been awesome. And you talk about, a guy who has incredibly increased his value over the time he's been with the Cubs. I mean, that was a great pickup. But I do like, again, those young arms they've gotten. We got to remember, Ethan Roberts got hurt early. He had TJ surgery. He'll be back at some point, maybe the second half of next year. But Efros and Hughes are a couple of young guys who are still in there. I do question kind of where you go with that. Is it some young guys that are going to have to come up to fill some spots? Do they end up kind of picking up some other? I mean, you got Mark Leiter Jr. who can come back up, and there's other pitchers who are kind of out there just floating around who they can use. But it is one of those deals where really what happens the rest of this year, a lot of it'll be kind of, you're putting these guys like under the dome and kind of watching them a little bit, putting them in the fishbowl, see what happens. And you're also talking about, we talked about these guys getting promoted to Chicago, but there will be a lot of moves from whether that's PCA moving up to Double-A. Maybe James Triantos comes up to South Bend, right? Owen Casey could get some time at Double-A. Who knows? Like, I think they're going to be more aggressive with a lot of these position players than what we've seen maybe otherwise. The pitchers are really the issue, and how quickly some of those guys can move, because we still need to see that happen. It's great. They drafted a bunch of pitchers. A lot of them are college guys, but that's going to have to start coming. So I just want the trade deadline Band-Aid ripped off, I guess is where I'm going from it. Because it's just, because a lot of this stuff is going to happen. It's just a matter of let's get it done. And it's especially difficult because they are coming off this streak. They have the day off today. They've got three late games and then, an evening game, right, going from Thursday through Sunday. Then they have another day off, and then they're in St. Louis the day of the deadline, and that's that night. And it's very similar to last year when they were in Washington, right?
Yeah.
As you recall, Chris Bryant flew with the team to Washington, and in the pregame, that's when we got that video of him hugging it out when he found out that he had been traded, right? The evening before. So he's in his Cubs gear, he's in his warm-up stuff, in the visitors' dugout. And so, like, if they're going to do this, and I understand some of the stuff takes up until the last second to get figured out, but I don't want to see Ian Happ or Wilson Contreras in St. Louis in the dugout finding out they got traded away from the Cubs. Like, if they're going to get moved, I want them to get moved when they're in San Francisco. Maybe Wilson gets traded to the Giants. He could just stay there.
The
or
game
on that Monday.
6:45 Central, and the trade deadline is 5 p.m. Central. So it's really close, but hopefully everything will be ironed out before
Just do it on Monday. Get them done on Monday. Yeah. Let's or before. The Giants are a team that's been rumored. I mean, you mentioned how poorly they've been playing, and maybe they're playing themselves out of contention, but they need some help at catcher. And they're only, I don't know, well, after yesterday, might be farther behind. I know they were only like 2.5 games out of the wild card.
They're right there. But, they're 2.5.
Yeah, but they're in a very
still a game
division.
Under 500.
Yeah. So, I mean, can they've shown they can turn things on. They do have some talented players around there, but that would actually be kind of nice for me, though, because it's similar to Bryant being traded out there, where it's kind of like, I don't expect him to make much noise, so I don't really care that. And the Giants were really, really good last year, and they unfortunately faded. But I want to see Contreras go someplace where I don't have to be pissed. Like, trade him to Seattle. I don't think Seattle is in the market for him at all. But
that's Houston.
I haven't thought about the Mariners since they had Jay Buhner. Well, probably at some point in between there. But I don't want to see him in Houston. I don't want him to play for the Astros. I mean, they have a chance to win. That. But as long as it's not the Yankees, right, which I can't imagine. I don't want him to go to the Mets. I don't want to see the Mets do well at all. The
Mets aren't going to do well. But that's the thing. That's why I don't want him to go to the Mets.
But here's the thing: like, they have a glaring need at catcher. They have some really strong top prospects still, and they're going to have Max Scherzer with Jacob deGrom both pitching down the stretch. They will find a way to screw it up. But, man, it's going to take an even more monumental Metsing than we've probably seen in recent history for them to screw that up. And if they add Contreras to a team that's got those top two pitchers, right, with some other guys who are playing pretty well, they will absolutely be a force. Now, can they overtake the Dodgers? That's another question entirely. But, man, with those two pitchers.
Dude, the Braves are right on their tail.
Yeah, it'll be something.
Braves are 2 games back. They're getting ready to be overcome by the Braves. It's going to happen. And somebody had said, I saw in some comments that they want the Braves to trade for Wilson Contreras. I don't see that happening. You'd have Wilson Contreras.
I don't think that'll be the case.
Starting at catcher instead of his brother. That'd be a weird trade.
Just switch between catcher and DH,
Yeah, there you go. And so, yeah, a lot of interesting stuff for sure developing. And of course, the Cubs are probably almost 100% going to trade Wilson Contreras, but it is what it is. And we'll kind of see what plays out from that. But, I mean, you mentioned, like, I was looking at their numbers during this streak, and it's just uncanny. And it's just weird to think that they're able to kind of put all this stuff together. And the Phillies aren't a terrible team. I mean, they're right there in the wild card race. I think they're a few games over 500. They've been playing pretty badly lately. They're 3 games over 500.
Well, I mean, hell, they got swept by the Cubs. Of course, they're not playing very well.
Well, and the Pirates. It's nice to see the Cubs finally beat the Pirates. That was the weirdest 2-game series, a night game followed by a day game on a Tuesday, nonetheless.
Yeah.
I don't even know if they've had a day game on a Tuesday all season long. I guess no.
I mean, I guess it's, because it's a getaway type. I mean, it works out great for the timing, because then you can fly out to San Francisco that day, have a full day off out there.
Yeah.
But it was just very weird coming out of the break with it. And here's interesting note about that. While we're speaking about uncanny numbers and weird stuff, right? So Justin Steele went into that start in Philadelphia 21 fastballs away from the record for most four-seamers thrown without giving up a home run. 21 away. It was like 786, and the record was 807. And the first pitch he throws to Schwarber, he just jacks it for a home run.
But you don't think Schwarber knows that?
Right.
Come
like,
on.
What do you think? Like, Schwarber's hunting fastballs, dude. And I'm sitting there like, wow, I bet Schwarber reads Cubs Insider, and he knew. I know that's absolutely not the case because Kyle Schwarber can't read.
But we weren't the only one to cover
I'm kidding.
it, though.
He can read.
I mean, it was out there. It was very obvious.
But I put it out there, and I'm like, well, shit. Like, and I put it out like right before the start too. One pitch, dude. But yeah, I was and I get it, and he's leaning on that, but that was just one of those funny things where you sit there and you start thinking about it though, and you look at the number of pitchers, like the pitches that have been thrown 500 plus times without allowing a homer, and they are all. It was like Clay Holmes' sinker and Carlos Rodon's slider, and I forget what the other. So like these are like God tier pitches, right? And so to see Justin Steele up there with that many four-seam fastballs thrown without giving up a homer, like you didn't let one leak out over the plate and somebody just got lucky and barreled it. But that's really, really stuff like that stands out to me as far as his ability to continue to pitch well as he really starts. Man, and if he could just get that changeup, oh my goodness, I feel like that would be such a difference maker for him, but maybe it doesn't happen. So,
yeah, I mean, that's the thing is that listen, I think between Steele and Thompson, and I know Killian came up and didn't do well, but he's back in Iowa just dominating, and he will be up, I would imagine, in the second half of the season. And let's talk about Braylon Marquez real quick. He is dangerously close to bust territory.
Yeah, I mean, and I can't remember if we were talking about it or if I just saw a comment here or what, because somebody's like, "What's up with Marquez?" Nobody's heard about it. And then Jared Banner,
like 2 years,
farm director. Yeah, well, no shit, but there had been talks earlier like, oh, he's starting to ramp back up, he's getting into throw, and then it was like, oh no, last month, he had a debridement procedure, and there's a comment, somebody's like, what's debridement? I've never heard of that. I'm like, well, okay, anyway, but it's a cleanup. So it's better than like having your rotator cuff completely redone or having something, more structural in nature. But when you're talking about a dude who threw 2/3 of an inning in 2020 because he was at the alternate site, so he came up on the last day of the season, then didn't throw it all in 21 because he had COVID intake issues. And actually that was the problem with 2020, had COVID intake issues. There were conditioning issues. They had him get him back in shape. Yeah. And now he
had conditioning issues. And so you have a top prospect coming into camp with conditioning issues. Yeah. To me, that says everything. To me, that has bust just written all over it. Because if you're a top prospect, you want it.
Right. That's always been the knock on him, is as far as the maturity. And are you able to focus enough, right, to want to get better versus just leaning back on your net? Because the dude's got all the physical raw talent in the world. I mean, you throw it triple digits, crazy slider, all kinds of stuff, has it all. Big dude, right? The durability is now in question, but there was a lot of, when he took off at South Bend, a lot of that was attributed to the fact that he had finally bought into the idea of kind of pitch tracking on his off days and putting in some of the extra work on what it takes to be a baseball player. Unfortunately, right, we talked about 2020, but 2021 had issues with the COVID intake. Had the shoulder was barking there. Then had, I think he tested positive like maybe twice. Never pitched in 2021, right? Did not throw this year. So now we're talking about in 3 seasons, he has thrown 2/3 of an inning in competitive baseball games, right? He's been doing some work on the side, but none in the last 2 years. And for a pitcher, even if he's young, that is just so difficult to come back from. And he did pitch those 2/3 of an inning at the major league level, but he hasn't thrown above Double-A. Like, what are we going to see from this guy? Can he actually get back to doing anything? You know what I mean? Like, that is difficult, and I'm with you on that one. Unless he comes out and is good, we don't know how long he'll be. Hopefully this is a short time frame and he'll be able to resume a throwing program in the offseason and be back for spring training. But at this point, I think anything you get from this guy is gravy.
Yeah, I mean, he's the type of guy that, like, you end up. Is he on the 40 man? I think he is, right?
They had to protect him. Yeah.
Yeah, and so he's the kind of guy who, like, you don't protect, and then he ends up going somewhere else, and then he just ends up being like a Cy Young winner or something stupid like that. Like, he's a change of scenery guy if I've ever seen it, right? I mean, and
but
you hate to say that.
He's got to change something. A lot of this is bad luck. I'm not trying to put this all on him. Like, it's just a bunch of this. The situation has not been easy, but my concern is that he doesn't just need to get healthy. I think there are some things that he's got to put together psychologically and to be able to just push through. I'm not talking about injury, right? But to be, because the most difficult part of this, I don't think, is physical. If you've sat out 3 years.
Yeah.
So mentally trying to get yourself back into the groove and reestablish, because at this level, at the level at which he wants to pitch, it is just as much about the mental side of the game as it is the physical. Clearly, he's got the physical tools. Can he come back from this psychologically? Because I think that's just what's so difficult with all these. And that's something like, look at Mark Appel or someone like that, right? Who has talked a lot about that, former number 1 overall pick, right? All kinds of problems. And he finally just debuted this past season. He was drafted ahead of Chris Bryant and just made his debut this year. It's a great story, but again, that's one of those situations where he had to spend a lot of time figuring some things out.
Yeah, it's not encouraging when it comes to him. But the thing is that it feels like there's definitely some other guys, and now that they've just drafted 16 pitchers, and the thing about them drafting 16 pitchers is, I think it speaks much more, and I think some people kind of tend to overlook this, is it speaks much more to the position players that they have in place versus the fact that they failed developing pitchers.
Mm-hmm.
It's that they're nowhere to put position players. And that's why I'm really super interested to see who they get back in the trades they pull off here I think it's going to be very interesting to see. Cause I mean, I can't even get it up. Who are they going to trade for? I mean, are they going to trade for position players? I mean, are they just going to trade for guys to stock the system that they can then trade maybe in the off season?
I mean, that's about the only thing that would make any sense.
Roster?
Because you've got a limited number of spots, right? You can only have 180 players across your affiliates. And so if they've already got so many position players that they couldn't draft new guys to bring into the system, and that's just at the rookie levels right now. Right. So if you're trading for these guys, they're having to come in and play at low, high, AA.
And they need playing time.
Yeah. And so, I mean, some of that changes because you are going to trade some players away that'll open up a few spots. But, and I know procedurally they can make some things work, but I do kind of want, I mean, at some point, and Hoyer talked about that too, when he talked about getting aggressive, and it's like, you spend in 2 different ways. He talked about actual financial currency, and then he talked about prospect currency. And at some point, they're going to have to trade these players just for no other reason than to create room. But you can't have 6 shortstops all at the same level, right? So it comes down to, how do you kind of evaluate who that is, right? Who's going to bring that return, and who do you think, because they have a lot of guys at short, and as I mentioned, they have a lot of guys in the outfield. Those are a couple spots, and most of those guys who are in the outfield, right? It's not like a shortstop you can convert. They can move to third, they can move to second, they can move to the outfield. Yeah. Owen Casey ain't moving anywhere else. Like, he's a left fielder or a right fielder. He ain't going anywhere else, right? That's it. Bryce Ball is either a first baseman or a DH, and we look at that. Matt Mervis, first base or DH. Slaughter can move around a little bit, but there is limited capacity for some of these players. And so I think that's where it is a little bit important. And that's part of why you want to have somebody in place. Like, a bird in the hand is worth 2 in the bush, whatever you want to say. You need to establish who are these players who we're going to prioritize and put up, so then we know who we can move. Otherwise, you're just going to be sitting here for years and none of them might ever pan out. And that's the difficult part about prospects. They look great now. History is filled with a bunch of guys who were phenomenal prospects Cubs fans should know this well, and who then simply did not pan out at the major league level. So if you're sitting there counting on prospects, I've got some news for you. That might not be the best strategy long term.
But this, we compare this to, before this time period that we're in right now to before the Cubs won the World Series in 2016, because it's worthwhile comparing that. But at the end of the day, this is starting to feel, and on our last show, I believe I was saying that I thought next year was going to be 2014. But as we look more and more at how things are developing, I mean, next year could very well be like 2015, right? I mean, you've got a lot of young prospects who are definitely going to be hitting the major league team. You don't really have the veterans that were there to bolster the 2015 team, like Anthony Rizzo, for example. I mean, you trade away Wilson Contreras and Ian Happ, and you're not really left with that guy anymore. But you could really see this team next year being at the All-Star break a 500 team.
I think they got a lot of work to do. I think to get back to that.
Let's just talk about pitching. Steele, Thompson, Stroman, Killian, Hendricks.
It's all got to hit right.
You've got those 5 pitchers. I feel good about getting to 500 with those 5 guys. And if you look offensively, I mean, granted, you're going to lose 2 big pieces, but Mervis comes up, and who knows who else comes up from within the system. And I mean, things can start looking
Suzuki, Velasquez, Morel across the outfield. You've got Horner. We haven't talked about Nico Horner, but my God, I mean, how good is Nico Horner? I mean, man, he is just doing so well.
He's like top 5 shortstop in baseball right now.
Yeah, I mean, he's doing incredibly well. So yeah, I mean, if things hit,
let me reel that back. That Anthony Rizzo, I think actually Nico Horner is that guy, and thank you for reminding me of that, because he is the veteran guy, strangely.
Yeah,
and he's better than
he's
Anthony
been around
Rizzo
for a long, even though he doesn't have 1,000 professional.
I think he's better than Rizzo was.
He said it.
I'm telling you, I'm not saying he's going to be better over his career, but I'm just saying.
You show me when did Nico Horner offer to fight the entire Reds team? Huh?
That's coming.
Okay.
When did they play the Reds?
I don't know, but when that happens, if Nico Horner offers to fight some people, I feel like he would just smile at him and like comb his hair back, and they would all just
at Cincinnati, August 11th.
Beauty. Okay, well there we go. Maybe
so the
happen.
Cubs play. I'm looking at the schedule going forward, and we'll be done shortly. So if you guys are just sitting there on pins and needles waiting to hear what we say next, it will be over soon, I promise. But starting next month, they go to the Cardinals, then they play the Marlins, and then they play the Nationals, both at Wrigley. And then they've got the Field of Dreams game on Thursday.
Oh,
and then a day off.
That was a bad decision. Like, that was a terrible choice when they made it, right? We all saw that, we're like, oh God, these two teams. And thinking? Now it's like, who are they going to have? Because it's like Contreras and Votto will still be around because whatever. But who are they going to market for that game? Like, they got to change their marketing for it. I mean, the Cubs do have, you throw Horner and Morel on there and some other dudes, but it's like, man, that is not the game that you want to showcase. Is like, hey, America, here's our product. Let me find 2 of the shittiest teams we've got.
Yeah, but you know what?
They've traded off their stars.
It sets up really interestingly for the Cubs' young stars. This could be a coming out for a number of players. It could be Nelson Velasquez. It could be Chris Morel. It could be Nico Horner. I mean, anyone or all of them could go off in this game, and it's going to be, the talk of baseball if it happens, when it happens, because I'm going to predict it is going to happen. You got Seiya Suzuki in the limelight. I mean, it's from the Cubs' perspective. I mean, from the Reds' perspective, I don't think there's any real appeal, but I think there's some interesting things that could happen for the Cubs in that game. And I'm looking forward.
Well, at least they're 2 bad teams. It's not like it's the Cubs playing the Yankees or something, which actually they did play them pretty well when they squared off. And then the Reds actually beat the Yankees in their series in New York not long after the Cubs played them, which is just super weird. So yeah, I mean, who knows? Could some things happen? Absolutely. And the Cubs do have some fun, young, marketable players who I think, if they're surrounded, and that's again, we keep going back to it, but it's just the team was not built around the superstars properly, which goes back to my Soto point where I'm like, we've already seen a Cubs team that was not able to properly build around superstars who weren't very highly paid at the time. So I don't know that I trust them to do it right this time around, at least on a sustainable level. So we'll see. We'll see. There's a lot that's going to happen between now and just a week from now, let alone the entire winter and going into next season. So any number of ways. It would be very nice, though, if Mr. Hoyer would, for a moment stop his exec speak and maybe lay out even the slimmest example or blueprint. Like, you don't need to show me the full blueprint, but can you show me a sketch of what you think this building is going to look like? Because right now we're all left to guess, and I think the guesses are fairly good, but you don't have to give it all away and give up all your leverage just to tell us a little bit about what your plan is. That would be nice. That's all I'm asking.
I think we're going to be able to figure it out after the trade deadline. So we have a week left to go before, whatever happens with the trade deadline happens. And we'll definitely circle back looking at the schedule, as we've mentioned, 4 against the Giants and then Monday off, which is August 1st, which is the day before the trade deadline. So we will definitely have a show on August 1st. And that should be an interesting time because we'll either be right on the edge of whatever trades happen, or we'll be beyond them. My guess is that there may be some of the smaller trades might happen, some, kind of ancillary players, but I don't think you're going to see Ian Happ and Wilson Contreras traded before the absolute trade deadline. I mean, I remember last year, it was just like everything dropped right at the deadline. It was so insane. And I was in Chicago with my family as my kids came. Right. at the time, my 7 and 9-year-old kids come at differing times because they had different favorite players. One loved Anthony Rizzo and the other loved Chris Bryant. And so at separate times, they both come in the room crying about the trades that were taking place. And we actually did a show. We were doing a show like right at the deadline, I think, right? Didn't we do it like right as it was happening?
I think there was something like that because Rizzo went the day before. So at least that was a little bit, I don't know if that helped at all, but it was kind of that was the first shoe to drop, right? And then the other ones kind of kept falling. So, but yeah, I depending on what happens with Soto, I think there could be a bunch of stuff that's like right last second. So it'll get a little hairy. Should be interesting. We'll see.
Do you think
Maybe
Soto's going to get traded?
I don't know.
I think it's like 50-50, maybe
less. I don't think they're going to get what and I wrote about it earlier, the rumored names that are reported in the whole Cardinals thing. There's no way in hell that makes any sense based on the names that were shared. It was like 2 prospects, and then they were also going to take on Corbin. And, but I'm like, man, if something like that happened, if the Cardinals gave up Gorman and like one of their top 3 prospects, and then some other just dispensable parts to get Corbin, to eat Corbin's $69 million remaining and get Juan.
That's not going to happen. There's no way you're trading Juan Soto and then including a player who's going to bring down the value that you get back. That doesn't make any sense. And the Nationals have said as much. Right.
Which is kind of weird, even though the report said one thing. And I'm like, yeah, it's going to take a hell of a lot more than those 2 guys that were named to get Juan Soto.
They've got 2 years of Juan Soto. They do not need to trade him at the trade deadline. No. I think the only thing that Juan Soto is doing is just creating a lot of static around that's unnecessary around the trade deadline, to be honest with you. But
well, I would like the Cardinals to devote all their efforts to trying to trade for him and not being able to, and then being stuck with their dick in their hands. So if that happens, I'll be happy.
Yes. Let's on that note, I think that's a good way to end the show, actually. So, anyways, like I said, we'll see you guys back here next Monday, the day before the trade deadline. It should be interesting. Until then, have a great rest of your week, and we're out. See ya.